Hello all, I am Rashmi, member of Breakthrough Science Society. Here we are for the ninth lecture series in tribute of J.R. Lakshman Rao for his contribution to science and society. J.R. Lakshman Rao is a renowned science writer and has wrote more than 30 books and received Lifetime Achievement Award by Karnataka State and Technology Academy. JRL has been called as a star of Mysore. Even in his last day, had only one word on his lips, Vijnana. So with this further very short information about J.R. Lakshman Rao, today as we all know that India is going through rapid urban growth with high level of population, urban heat and environmental stress. Hence, urban ecology and biodiversity is essential for the resilience of entire cities, especially in India like country. So to throw more light on this, here we today we have Madam Harini with us on topic discussing on topic ecological smart cities in India from ancient to modern times. So for this ninth lecturer, I welcome Madam Harini, who is an ecological and professor of sustainability at Azim Premji University, where she leads the Center for Climate Change and sustaining sustaining. She has received number of awards, including Cyril Prize from the US, National Academy of Science, etc. Her publications include Nature, the City, and cities and cities. Madam also writes a monthly column, The Green Goblin, in Deccan Herald newspaper, and she is well-known public speaker and writer on issues of urban sustainability and science, and she also write on the issues of urban sustainability in India. So welcome Harini madam. I request you to throw us more light on this issue. So I welcome you all from Breakthrough Science Society.
Thank you so much. At the outset, ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. I'm very grateful to Breakthrough Science Society and also to the family of Professor J.R. Lakshman Rao, especially J.L. Anil Kumar, Brinda Nagaraj, Vidya Shankar, and Anuradha Rao for this invitation, because I can't think of a better event to speak on than in the memory of a great scientist and scholar like Professor Lakshman Rao. So it's a real privilege and an honor to do this. So thank you for that. Just give me 1 minute. I am just going to share my screen.
Sure, madam.
Yes. So, consider. You can see it, no?
Yes. Yeah. We are able to see it.
Okay. So I will talk about ecologically smart cities. We hear in the news smart cities quite a bit. What is a smart city? We normally think of technology, smartphones, and some kinds of futuristic visions of India like Singapore, and those have pluses and minuses, because sometimes you see quotes like "smart cities are for smart people." Which also implies that only people who can afford the smartphones can live in the smart cities of the future. I am taking it to a very different concept. That if you look at cities around us today, we cannot live in cities and expect the city to survive, or expect ourselves to survive, unless the cities are ecologically smart. And for that ecologically smart, what do I mean? I will explain in the talk. But essentially, what I mean is we need to think of this by going back to our roots, to ecological wisdom of ancient times, and seeing how to adapt that to not blindly taking it from ancient times to now, because of course a lot has changed, but moving from there onwards to what you see now. So with that, let me just start my presentation. And this is a slide that gives you a sense that the world is experiencing a very massive urban transition. These are night light satellite images. And the only crazy people who put on the lights at night and leave them on the whole night are people in cities. So this gives you a very good sense of cities and where cities are located. What you can see is North America is of course lit up, Europe is lit up, but you will see areas of India, China hugely lit by lights. So India is becoming an urban country. We are right now only 33% of India lives in cities, but by 2050, about half of India is projected to be living in cities. Already more than half of the world lives in cities, and it by 2050 or thereabouts, it will be 75% of the world will move into cities. So the world is going through massive urban transition. What do we know about these cities? If you take this map, which is a world, which is a urbanization projects prospects map from the United Nations, you can see the cities in yellow and red. These are the fastest growing cities. And I want to point you to one thing. When we think of urban areas and cities, we tend to think of New York or Paris or the big cities of the West. But the fastest urbanizing countries in the world are India, China, and Nigeria. And the kinds of urbanization we have in our cities, the kinds of ways in which people live in cities, the kinds of things they do in cities, the ways in which our cities grow, is very different to the ways these other cities, these foreign cities grow. Unfortunately, most of the understanding we have on how to live in cities comes from these areas, from the US, from Europe, from Hong Kong, from Japan. And that's why we get into problems like this whole smart city thinking, because that was evolved in a different condition, in a different context, and we can't just import those ideas into Indian cities. They don't work very well. So what are Indian cities like? These are some of the kinds of problems we have in Indian cities. Water pollution, that is the photograph in the top left, is our famous or infamous Bengaluru lake, which is always frothing. It looks like snow, but it's actually a toxic pollution and froth. We have slums which have heat island effects with aluminium sheets. We have a paradox where you have places like Chennai and Mumbai which flood severely in the monsoon, and then they are dry, bone dry in summer, and the bore wells are dry and the city runs out of water. So you have flooding and drought in the same cities. And of course, you have intense air pollution, and Indian cities have now overtaken Chinese cities by being some of the most polluted cities. So we can't live in these cities without nature, without ecology. And why I say this is to start off with by going against a standard refrain. Most people will say India is a developing country. Our cities need to grow for the economy to grow and for people to come out of poverty. And therefore, you can't afford to have ecology. These ecological activists or environmental activists are actually anti-development. You should allow the cities to grow. And you can do for your ecology preservation in distant forests or areas outside the city. And this is something we have heard very often. Once I remember when there was an entire lecture series, and a man got up who was working in Vidhan Sauda, and he said, ಯಾವ ಮೂರ್ಖನಿಗೆ ಮರ ಇಷ್ಟವಿಲ್ಲ, ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ದೊಡ್ಡವರು, ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರಿ ಮರಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟು ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂ ಇದೆ, ಇದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾವು ಮರ ಇಟ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, ಕಡಿಬಾರ್ದು. So why, which idiot does not like trees? There's no point all of you esteemed personalities standing up and telling me about the value of a tree. But I work in the Vidhan Sauda. I live in a different part of the city. I have to go in a bus every day. Because of your trees, my roads are not getting widened. Because the roads are not getting widened, I am stuck in traffic and I go late to work and my salary is cut. Right? So how do you explain to people that you still need trees in the city? You can't have a city which is just built on roads and infrastructure. And with that in mind, I am going to talk about ecological wisdom, because all of the ills that plague us today, whether it's polluted water, polluted air, or heat waves, or flooding, or drought, I think they are all telling us one thing, that we simply cannot live in a city without ecology. We can't live in the rest of India also without ecology, because in 5 years or so, projections say 5 to 10 years, by 2030, let's say, we will add 400 million people to our cities. Already in the next 20 years, 3 times of as many parks or protected areas that we have are going to come very close to cities, not because the protected areas are moving, but because cities are expanding. Look at, for instance, Bhopal has a park protected area close to it. In Delhi, you have the Yamuna Ridge. In Bangalore, you have the Bannerghatta Forest. In Mumbai, you have the Sanjay Gandhi National Park. And it's now common that leopards get into Mumbai or elephants get into Bangalore, or in Coimbatore, you have wildlife from the Western Ghats coming in. So there are problems both of for cities and for protected areas. There are problems of drying rivers. Let's take the Kaveri. Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are fighting about the water in the Kaveri, but the water in the Kaveri is also reducing over time because we're cutting down forests in Coorg. And if we cut down forests in Coorg, we're changing rainfall patterns. And why are we doing that? Because we need this cutting down of wood to fuel demands which are from our growing cities. Or the fact that much of the water from the Kaveri, so much of it is going to our cities. For instance, Bangalore takes up a lot of Kaveri's water. Cities have rising electricity and infrastructure demand. Because of that, we have a coal crisis. And because of that, we can't move to renewable energies and we increase our demands on coal, and climate change is there. And of course, cities take their waste and dump them in the backyard where villages are and contaminate places there. So it's not just ecologically smart cities are not just to save the cities and the people in the cities, but also the people outside. Cities can't survive if they ignore ecology. India can't maintain rural well-being unless we look at ecology. And my book, which I wrote in 2016, is a culmination of several years of research. This is research that I started in 2006, trying to understand in Bengaluru what was the history of the city and how did the city grow and what is ecological wisdom in the city. So now in the rest of my talk, after having set this background up, I want to explain the evolution of Bengaluru. And so this is a conventional, you look at this map, the gray areas are the BBMP areas, Brihat Bengaluru Mahanagara Palike, which is current Bengaluru. That's the gray. That smallest right in the center, the maroon smallest dot that looks like a mushroom, that is Kempegowda's Bengaluru. And what do we hear from the Wikipedia history of Bengaluru? Kempegowda was a visionary. He came to a barren land, completely barren, devoid of people. He saw a hare chasing a hound. And normally dogs chase hares and rabbits, but here it was a hare chasing a hound. And he said it's a Gandabhumi or a site of bravery that gave him inspiration. He yoked 4 bullocks to 4 corners, and where they moved for a day, those boundaries were the boundaries of the city. Now, no doubt, Kempegowda was a great visionary, but no one can build a market town like Bengaluru on nothing. There must be something to support commerce. Only then can you build. And what there was many, many villages around this place which were already known for various kinds of things, including their textiles, including their agriculture, including their fruits and vegetables that they were growing. What were those and how do we know what was there? So Bengaluru is an odd ancient place of residence. Why am I saying it's odd? Most ancient places of residence, cities, towns, villages, all came up against water areas of sources of water. So either it was along a river or close to the sea. And this is something we learn always in school textbooks. But Bengaluru is in a semi-arid area. It's in a plateau, but in the rain shadow of the Western Ghats, it's quite dry. It doesn't get much water. It does not have any perennial sources of water, not even one source of water that is there year-round, because all the small streams that you get, including the Arkavati, are largely seasonal. We know now that Bengaluru gets water from a lot of tiny tanks or what we call lakes now. So does much of Peninsular South India, and these are connected around a gradient. So along Bengaluru is an undulating landscape. And I'll show you this actually. This next image is what we call a digital elevation model. It shows you the elevation of Bangalore. What is the high rise? Where are the dips? Where are the valleys? You can see a few things here. You can see that the mountainous areas, that is the dark greens, are the tips of the hilly areas. So Bengaluru, if you drive around, especially if you're an old Bengalurian, you will know that the city used to have all these big granite boulders and rocky areas. And that area is largely from this map, as you can see, to the west. The west of the city is what was called the Malnad area because it was rocky. The east of the city is flatter, more gentler slopes. It has grassy plains. It is called the Bailu. area, which is so it is the Bailu or the Maidan area of relatively grassy plains. And so you realize that Bengaluru, what we consider one city, is actually two geographic zones in some sense. Two topographic zones, two geographic zones. The rainfall is also different. In the Malnad area to the west, relatively sparse amount of rainfall, and therefore what you have is these rocky granite outcrops. The vegetation is very thorny. There are very few large trees. The grassy area, or the Bailu or the Maidan towards the east, is very gentle slopes, lots of grass, relatively easy for settlers who came in to do agriculture or to have cows, because you didn't have to clear up much land. There were no stones, there were no these large stones were not there, and there was a little bit more rainfall. So when you saw, if you look at how do you know who lived in this landscape before? So we know that the landscape, at least 2000 years BC, around that time, there were these megalithic stone tombs that have been found in different parts of Bangalore. And these megalithic stone tombs are these sort of menhir type burial sites where you have these large stones arranged in a circle around in farming areas. And we know that these are megalithic stone tombs, so we can date them roughly back to about 2000 BC. Who are these people? Where did they live? Why did they live there? We don't know anything about their record. We also know that there were around somewhere between 500 BC and 500 AD coins of that period. Roman coins in very large numbers have been found in a number of different locations across the city. And not just Roman coins, but coins that were exchanged in different places, different parts of the world. So in Roman urns. So we know that Bangalore possibly was a site of trade and some commerce around this 500 BC to 500 AD period. But who are these people? Why was it? It's very fascinating. We don't know anything about that. It's not on a trade route. Two, there are no trade routes that intercross here. There are no water sources. So who are these people? We don't know. However, from about 500 AD onwards, we start finding these inscriptions. They are on copper plates, they are on stones, and those inscriptions start telling us that villages started being built in these areas and they were commemorated. The creation of a village was often commemorated, or some land grant was commemorated in these areas. From the 6th to the 9th, I have divided these till Kempegowda came into 4 different dynasties. So first came the Ganga dynasty, people during the Ganga dynasty. You see all these inscriptions, and one thing you can see if you put them on a map, it's very clear that they're in the Bailu, they're in the Maidan area. Why? Because that's the easiest area for people to colonize. Ecology becomes important when people come in, especially into these kinds of areas, because if you had a choice to construct your village, wouldn't you construct it in flat land where you could plow the land and plant something? Why would you take it to the top of a rocky area and build it in that kind of a place where you're surrounded by thorny bushes and it's difficult to do agriculture? You will not. So it's very clear that they start in the easier areas, in the Maidan areas. There's not that much further building during the Chola dynasty. However, by the time of the Hoysala dynasty, 13th, 14th centuries, there is an explosion of new villages that are built. And along with this, you start seeing the building of tanks. So you look at the very first name here, you will see Honga Sandra. Sandra is a common ending name you will see for many water bodies. And Sandra really means Samudra, a large body of water. It's a corruption of the word Samudra, which does not only mean sea, it means large body of water. So you'll see a lot of Sandras, Honga Sandra, which is one, as well as 1920, Malla Sandra, Singha Sandra. You will see all of these have vanished. The names are there, but there are no water bodies. But the Hoysalas built a lot of large tanks like these Sandras, but they also built smaller ones. For instance, Kunte, you actually see, and that I should point to. So these smaller water bodies were built not just by rulers, but also by common people. So Suli Kunte meant a local prostitute built the tank probably. And you can think of the incredible sacrifice that went in, that commoners would raise money through all kinds of means to build these locations. Dodda Nekkundi, so these kinds of small water bodies were also there of different kinds. Kattes, Kuntes, all the way to Sandras. Some were used for washing cattle, some were used for drinking water, some were used for domestic purposes. And then by the 14th to 16th century, you see that there is no place for people to build. They have to start moving up into the Malnad area. So they get into the rocky areas and they start building. But what did they do? In these different places, they had different livelihoods. Ecology shaped what people could do and how they could commercially exploit the land. So, for instance, a typical inscription of the Maidan area is they grant a pour, that's it's a land grant on a piece of stone, which says that we grant with pouring of water a devadana for the god. This is a temple god in a village, and for this devadana for the village, the temple will own this land, that is the tank of the village. Then the wet and dry lands, that is the irrigated lands and the non-irrigated lands. The dry lands is the ragi and the wet lands is irrigated by the tank, including the wells underground and the trees overground. This is very important because in today's conception of any area, we never think of wells underground and trees overground as part of it. But look at their dimension. They understood that anything they did and the support for commerce and the support for livelihood and the support for sacred, for the support of the temple came from the life-giving water underground, the wells underground, and the life-giving shade overground, which is the trees overground. We've completely forgotten that today. Right? We never ever, I mean, who in our imagination, you think of survey boundaries, any of us who bought or sold land, homes, do we ever say this is the trees overground which is part of my property and that goes into the survey record, or the wells underground that go into the survey record? No, we've removed the wells everywhere. If you look at the hills, the Malnad area, it's a very different landscape. There is the jungle, there are wild beasts, and there is pastoralism. They don't have agriculture. That landscape didn't support agriculture. But there are wild beasts, and there are all the inscriptions you find in the Malnad talk about hunts. So in Kengeri, death of Ramadeva was killed by a wild boar. Kanakpura, Rajendra Solo Anadadu was killed from a tiger attack. Another person died from a tiger attack. And Sokko Elangatan and his dog, his hunting dog, both of them. So there were hunting dogs also which died in a boar hunt. Or there were hero stones describing cattle raids. But even today, these areas where these inscriptions are areas of high biodiversity. The Bannerghatta National Park is in this area. And these are areas of really high biodiversity. So what I want to tell you is, if you look at a map of landscape of Bangalore today, and this is the tanks of Bangalore of the 1970s, which I've shown you on a Bangalore BBMP outline, the Bangalore boundaries outline. What you see is there were two topographic. There's the Vrishabhavati Valley and Hebbal Valley to the west, and to the east is the Koromangala Chalagatta Valley. And this topography, this ecology, is something that earlier settlers knew. Today, nobody knows. I didn't know till I started my work on Bangalore that there are these two zones of the Malnad and the Maidan. Yet, builders and planners don't consider it. Nobody in the city knows it. Today, if you're buying an apartment, you are thinking of how close you are to the airport or how close you are to any workplace. But the topography and the ecology still influences us. Because, for instance, if you buy a land in the low-lying part of the city, as you do in Mysore, I know Mysore also had really bad floods recently, just this week, you will find that area floods. Most ironically, Sampangi tank, which used to be a tank in the part of this heart of Bangalore, which is now the Chinnaswamy Stadium. There was a time that I was part of on World Environment Day, the Bangalore Water Supply Department had a talk series there to commemorate the importance of water. Just 2 weeks before that, it was extremely wet. The entire Kanthirwa Stadium where we were having that seminar was filled with water because it was Sampangi Lake and it had to be pumped out. And then there was a number of school children who were brought to listen to us, who were very bored with us because we were talking, and they had to sit the whole day. But when I asked them, not one of the children knew that we were sitting in a lake. We were talking about water conservation. We were talking about World Environment Day. And except two of the old BWSSB engineers, the BWSSB also did not know that this Kanthirwa Stadium where we were holding this used to be Sampangi Lake. Right? So we see that this is the growth of Bangalore, but we have completely forgotten the way in which the city grew. And the first thing I think is important for us is, as the city grew, or as the villages, before it became a city, as the villages grew, they grew by paying attention to water, by creating these water bodies, because otherwise they couldn't, and are planting trees. So unless they paid attention to the wells below and the trees above, they knew they could not grow. So this is the scene we have till Kempegowda's time, and 1537 Kempegowda came and founded the market town. After that, what survives is oral history, myth. It's so past, back, and future. There are lots of stories of Kempegowda doing this and that, but we know very little about what he did. We have one inscription, for instance, that talks about Kempegowda's mother, and we don't know which of the Kempegowdas, but Kempegowda's mother actually had a flower top, a flower garden. So that is described in there. And oral history tells us that Kempegowda and his family also created a few different kinds of lakes in there as Bangalore's population grew. But our next written description of Bangalore comes from this Bangalore of the 1640s. So Shahji, who was Shivaji's father, came along with the Bijapur Sultanate army and captured Bangalore from the fourth Kempegowda, Magadi Kempegowda, and took it over. And his court poet, Parameshwar, wrote this poem, Shiva Bharat, about Bangalore. And that in that you can see this description of Bingrul, which is what the Marathas called Bangalore. It resounded with the content of countless pigeons. There were peafowl which dashed in and out. The city teemed with deep lakes. Each house was graced by a well. There were fountains in every square. Trees thick with flowers and shade lined each home garden. The city was girdled by a bottomless moat, glimmering with water, and dotted with countless lakes, each as big as a sea. So the Samudra metaphor comes back. Picturesque parks festooned with creepers swinging gaily in the breeze all adorned the city, and Shahji ruled here like Indra in his paradise. So we see that the city again had grown, but as a place of nature. And this is what I want to keep coming back to. In today's urban imagination, we assume that more people will inevitably destroy nature. But that's not true, because up to a point in Bangalore, as more people came in, they actually improved the ecology from the human perspective by having these lakes. Yes, they had homes, but each home came with a home garden. It came with a well. There were parks with creepers. There were lakes, there were further lakes that were developed. What happens after 1640s? I mean, after 1670, after Shahji passes away? Many rulers, lots of changes come. So Shahji, then it goes to Shahji's son. Then the Mughals take it over for a while. Then the Wadiyars take it over. Then of course Hyder comes. Then Tipu comes. In 1791, briefly Tipu loses Bangalore for a year and a half to the British before he ransoms it back. And at that time, the first thing that the British do, of course, is come and make sketches and draw paintings of this area. So this is the next piece of information we have of Bangalore. And here are the lakes. And now, remember, I've drawn the cantonment and the Pete areas. The cantonment is, of course, the British area. It's a part of Bangalore that didn't exist in 1791. I've drawn it to give you a sense of the geography of the city. However, you can see that there were a lot of lakes. Many more lakes were created. We don't know about Hyder and Tipu creating lakes, but we do have a lot of emphasis in the descriptions in literature of whenever there was a respite between wars, that they would restore the lakes and they would clean up the wells. Because one thing that was done during guerrilla warfare, whether it was the Marathas or the English, was to poison wells and to burn and cut down the trees in many places. So that was one thing that was done very constantly. And we know that Tipu and Hyder spent money in restoring the lakes and the water bodies. So this is what the city looked like in 1791. And you can see in 1792, this painting, east view of Bangalore with a cypress garden. You can see the trees in the distance, the cypress trees, that is Lal Bagh. And you can see the structure of Bangalore, very rocky, very open and barren, but nevertheless, trees have been planted in strategic places wherever people need for shade along roadsides or for groves. This is Bangalore by 1888. Now the cantonment is really full of British people and their entourages. New areas of the city have not yet been opened. So Basavangudi has not come, Malleshwaram has not come. They all come in 1892. But you see many, many, many more water bodies. And in fact, as people start increasing and the population keeps increasing, the British keep digging the area and creating new lakes. And of course, they plant a lot of trees. They have access to a palette, which is from the Kew Gardens, from their conquests across the world. And so they get trees following an ancient, so coming back to the idea of ecologically smart cities and ancient cities. In Kalidasa's Ritu Samhara, they talk, so the idea of the Ritu Samhara is to have trees of every season. So whenever you look out, a king walks into his garden, you have a garden, a set of trees which are blossoming no matter what the season is. Now, of course, it was much harder to do that if you're in one ecological regime. But if the British have to follow it, they can get trees from Madagascar, trees from Brazil, and they've done that in Bangalore and in Mysore, so that you have trees that look beautiful and flower at any time of the year. And they brought in, like, the German horticulturalist Krumbiegel, for instance, was instrumental. So was John Cameron, who built Cubbon Park largely in planting those trees. And you can see it because the British, when they come in, start complaining in the 1860s about climate change in Bangalore. And they say that the city used to be so cold in the morning that the sepoys' fingers would be cramped when they fired their muskets. And now every house now, and used to require a fireplace. And now it's really hot, so we need to plant these trees. So they do two things. They create more lakes and they plant more trees. And what happens is, by 1892, Sankey tank is built. That's the last tank, because Colonel Sankey, who created that tank, says that there's no more place in Bangalore to build any more tanks. But the population continues to increase. And now the amount of water that is supplied by these lakes or tanks is no longer enough. Another thing happens between 1889 to 1892. There are 3 years of successive drought. So also the rains don't refill the lakes. And at that time, the Maharaja decides to have a project where they will get water from 3 lakes outside the city near the Arkavati and pump them in so that piped water will be available. The original plan is to only do it for the areas which are part of the Mysore Maharaja's control of Bangalore. And the cantonment areas covered by the British will not be given. But the British asked them, and now piped water is given to the whole city. At that time, they had a chance of making a crucial decision. They could have said, we will supplement the lake water in the city with piped water from outside. But no, they decided to replace the piped water in the city. At that time, what do? They fracture a local cycle of dependence. You depended on this local system of water. You no longer depend on it. You get water from outside. And almost immediately, the narrative about water in Bangalore changes. They now become talked about as malarial, sources of filth, sources of disease, places to be drained. So if Sampangi tank is drained, Alsur Lake, which is in the heart of the city, that long piece gets cut down to half its size. People start throwing corpses in wells. During the plague time, nobody wants to be found with a corpse in the house because you might be relocated to a quarantine camp. So they start throwing corpses in wells, right? So you start seeing the changes. So the city itself has trees, as I said, and this is 1890. You'll see the native part of the city, or the Pete area, has a lot of trees. And areas like Cubbon Park with the St. Mark's Church and Bandstand are also extensively being planted. But the lakes start disappearing. And by 2015, this is the state of the city. You have Alsur Lake, which is half its size, but almost all the other lakes within the city have disappeared. And you have a lot of trees, though, because you still need shade at that point. So trees were planted quite aggressively till about the 1995, 2000, thereabouts. So what happens? As the city gets piped water, lakes and wells become polluted. As the city gets hotter with more people, trees are planted. But even here, there's a shift in the kind of way in which you think of ecology. And I'll give you an example. We used to have lakes. We have lakes still in Bangalore. There's a lot of citizen movement for revival. But what were the lakes in Bangalore before? They are very much similar to the kinds of ways in which we have lakes in Mysore even today. They were used for washing and watering livestock, dhobis. Women were foraging for these different kinds of grains that they use for cooking. People, migrant women, worker women wash their clothes there. Now you have recreational lakes which are used only for jogging and walking. Similarly, you had Gundatops, which were village forests, which are there across Karnataka, and they have either been converted to government public utilities or waste dumps, or if they exist in gated parks like this. So they have become recreational parks. They are no longer Gundatops, right? They have all been rejuvenated for water recharge or recreation. You used to have wooded streets like this. This is a photograph from KR Road. And this is banyan trees, and we were talking to somebody who was, there's a bamboo weaver community that lives along the roadside. And this gentleman was old. He was in his mid-70s. He is born and grown up on the side of KR Road till they were relocated when the metro came. And he was saying his mother never had a day's where she had to go to the doctor for cough and cold, even though they lived on the road. Because when she had a cough, his father would go to the banyan tree and make a scratch on the sap, and take the sap of that from there, and the previous night's ragi mudde she would mix with that sap and swallow first thing in the morning on a dry in a without wetting her throat, and that apparently would take away the cough and cold. So these streets, these trees, they were their home, they were their shelter, they were everything. For women, they were privacy screens behind which they could have a bath, they could. And look at KR Road today. So when we interviewed the bamboo vendors, they were saying that not just when they cut down the trees have they lost their shelter, they have lost their livelihoods, they have lost their way of life, and they have lost privacy, they have lost homes, they have lost so much in this entire way of moving to a different kind of city. Similarly, this used to be Lal Bagh. Lal Bagh had fruit trees. So Lal Bagh was originally a cypress garden of Tipu and Hyder, but it also had Tipu Sultan's mango trees. And Tipu Sultan used to do a lot of experimentation here in terms of bringing in different tree species from different parts of the world and growing different kinds of fruit. And these are the kinds of parks that are left today. Completely landscape, purely recreational, green, lawn-based parks. And we bring in tankers during summer to actually irrigate these lawns. Whereas if you had a much more tree-based park with fruit trees, you would not need to do that. Even private spaces have changed. This is an old Bangalore bungalow. Look at the kind of chajja you have with this creepers, with beans that are growing, avarekalu and other kinds of broad beans. And we have done studies that show that people in Bangalore's home gardens grow a variety of food species of other kinds of medicinal plants. But when you move to apartments, they become manicured lawns and ornamental plants, and hardly anyone plants anything that is useful or edible in an apartment. There's a shift in mindset. So modernity, the growth of cities, brings this complete change in the way we think about our cities. However, if you look at a slum in Bangalore, slums seem to be one of the last refuges for multifunctional nature. The highest proportion of local species, native species, and used species are in slums because space is so scarce. People grow plants in old buckets, in paint buckets, in old utensils, on the top of roofs, all kinds of ways in which they grow these plants, and they grow local species because they know their uses. So if you want to really look at which places have native species and support native biodiversity, it's actually the slums, the most surprising place that you would not think of going. So if you look at parks, 80% of the trees in parks are exotic, but if you get slums, then 65% of local species in slums are plant species in slums are local. So it completely flips. This is the place that is the refuge of biodiversity. And of course, sacred spaces. If you look at mosques, temples, churches, cemeteries. So you have near the Hosur Road, you have all three cemeteries: the Hindu cemetery, the Christian cemetery, and the Muslim cemeteries. And if you look at that area, which is all adjacent to each other, the kind of biodiversity you find in that area is incredible. And this is an example of a pigeon from one of the temples in Malleshwaram. But you see that sacred spaces are also resilient. That's where you have ants, ant hills protected, roosting sites are protected, across diverse faiths. This is not just in the temples, but in the temples, churches, and mosques, and in the cemeteries, the sacred sites of India, of Bangalore, you find a lot of biodiversity. So these are the surprising places that you find have the old ecological wisdom. The sacred spaces, maybe not so surprising, but the slums is counterintuitive till you think of it, and it becomes actually then very obvious that, of course, these are the places where migrants from rural areas come in, and of course they still have that old ecological wisdom with them. These are the challenges. What are the ways forward? So I wanted to offer two ideas of ways forward, because I do want this talk not to just be about the lament of what is lost with ancient wisdom, but what can we do to restore some kind of that ecological wisdom in a modern context. So Kaikondali Lake is a lake on Sarjapur Road, close to my house. And when we moved into this area in 2005, 2006, there was plans by the BBMP to restore the lake. So citizens movement started where many people got together and decided to restore the lake along with the BBMP. And Priya, who is the lady you can see squatting at the side of the lake in this photo, Priya Ramasubban is a documentary filmmaker. Ramesh, who is the gentleman in the orange t-shirt who tragically passed away last year, who's another very good friend of mine. Ramesh and I, and a number of other people got together to create a citizens group to restore the lake along with the BBMP. And this lake was drained and restored in a way which now has been recognized by, for instance, Professor Elinor Ostrom, who won the 2009 Economics Nobel Prize, came and planted a jackfruit tree to recognize this. This is how the lake looks now after restoration. But it's important that, so this lake we try to do a little differently. In the sense of restoring it, it does have a jogging and walking track, which is also important in the city. But we try to make sure, for instance, the BBMP does not permit grazing. But people living in the nearby village can come without any charge and cut grass and take it away on bikes. So that they remove the grass, with that they remove the nutrient load of the lake and it helps keep the lake clean, but they also get their livelihood support. Or there is a government low-income aided school whose playground was on the lake, but it was encroaching the lake. So when we restored it, the BBMP original plan was to create an ornamental garden on that area. But how can you take school children's playground away from them? So what is done is now the lake divides the playground with the school children. It's of course within the border, but there's a gate, so the kids use it during the weekdays, and in the evenings and during weekends, the lake has various other things. So during a Kere Habba, which was done a few years ago, there's an annual Kere Habba. Students of Gear School, which is another high-income school close by, came and created a play area in the Kaikondoli Lake, which the school kids can use and other visitors can use, making based on scrap equipment, old tires, all kinds of other things that they use to create this very nice play area. So it's a different place which is trying to look at equity, which is trying to use ecology well, which is allowing grazing, where the fishermen are very important, for instance, collaborators, because fishermen are the ones who are on site. A lot of these apartments that you see around are supposed to have sewage treatment plants, but will let in sewage in the middle of the night into the lake. And then if once sewage is in the lake, you'll see all the fish die. So the fishermen are the ones there at night who somehow try and block the sewage inflow and do treatment on the lake. So they are the best allies of the lake. Right? So working with these traditional approaches of fishers and grazers, understanding why they're so important for the lake. This Kaikondadi Lake, another lake called Saulkere, the Jakur Lake in Yelahanka, that does very good work with local fisher communities and with the community garden with local women. So these are ways in which one can try and move something forward. And if you look at, we've done interviews, for instance, with visitors to the lake. There are all kinds of people who have connections to the lake. So for instance, the lady below is D. Bhagyamma, and she said she calls herself the lake's Dattaputri. She said, I was christened at the lake. And she has very strong connections to the lake when she moves around. She's one from the original village communities that used to live around the lake. There is a mother of a differently abled child who has ADHD and who needs to get his energies out. So she brings him every morning to the lake. So he runs around, gets his energy out, and then calms down enough to go to school. There are corporate employees who come to these lakes with a cup of tea in the evening so that they get a break and mentally refresh themselves. There are transgender community people who have told us that they come to the lake because if they want to sit somewhere in the city, the police chase them away because they think they're soliciting. But this lake, they say, accept us, doesn't judge us. So these approaches, I'm not saying they've been superbly successful, but they give us insights into a new way of using ecological wisdom in the city. And they're very different from other areas. So if you look at other BBMP lake areas, for instance, they say flower plucking is prohibited, swimming is prohibited, damaging plants and trees. Any interaction with the lake is prohibited. So you can only walk around a fenced area. If you only walk around a fenced area, how will you ever have an intimate connection to this lake? So this kind of approach is one thing that we are seeing. The second is urban foraging. We did a study where we looked at people, 200 women from low-income houses across Bangalore. And from just these 200 respondents, they bought or foraged, that is picked, wild plants in the city. 76 different species. 76 different species, we got information from just 202 respondents. Only 16% now can still collect because some places are polluted, some places they don't have access to. But at least half of them buy these plants, wild plants. We found, for instance, these women who gave us a lot of information on this, and we are trying to put together a booklet now that says how you can use these local plants. Because when you have manicured gardens, you exclude all of these. We think of them as weeds. but they're actually, there's something that is good for hair, there's something good for the brain, something else for stomach ache, something else for the, for all kinds of illnesses. As traditional knowledge, there's ecology, all of this comes together in these places. And there are markets, for instance, we found out in Baswangudi, there are markets where you can go to somebody and order these species. I want these plants, and they will go and forage for them a little outside the city and come back and give it to you. These are not just esoteric approaches. How do you scale up these ideas? There are a number of groups. For instance, there is Suresh Samuha, who is in Sarjapura Karis. He's an artist, the person with the spectacles on his head right now, the third left on the left. So he is an artist who's from one of the villages near Sarjapura, just on the fringes of Bangalore. And he's working in his local village now to train women to reuse these, these old arts of using old varieties of plants, for instance. And during the lockdown, he had a program where many of them used to work as domestic help. They had lost their jobs, so they could go foraging back to the lake areas after cleaning them up. And people in cities would have a subscription program where they buy these greens from him every week. And now he has a program where he gives you seeds for free for many of these. The only return he wants is the first crop, you let it go to seed and you give him back seeds. So his seed bank increases. Right? So there are people like this trying to scale this up and have farmers and live sessions. There is another group in Pune which is doing something called Forgotten Greens. They had a rewilding food festival at the end of August. They run regular online workshops which tell you how to go out and forage for plants around you and use them in your cooking, what is safe, what is not safe, and what is nutritious. And unfortunately, what we found is when we put together this is a paper that we wrote on case studies across South Africa, the US, Europe, and India. Urban foraging, this foraging for wild plants in wild parts of the city is very widespread. Whether it's in the heart of the US, in places like New Orleans, you have this. In places like New York, you have it. In Switzerland, you have it. In Sweden, you have it. And yet, urban planners will always try and ban urban foraging. So again, this is my second aspect of ecological wisdom. You must have ways to bring this kind of foraging back, because most city authorities frame it as undesirable, but it helps you develop that strong, intimate connection to the wild. So in conclusion, nature in Bangalore has witnessed centuries of change. It used to be brown and dusty. As people came in, as the city grew, we made it blue and green. And the bluing and the greening of the city is what supported population growth. Now it's becoming featureless grey concrete, but I think we have to bust the myth that to urbanize, you have to sacrifice nature, because actually Bengaluru till the 1890s grew because it increased the blue and green in the spread of blue and green in the city. Even now, nature does survive and thrive, but in fragmented places like slums, lakes, and sacred spaces that are managed as commons or community areas. The other problem with the city is it's private property focused. Once you have private property, you want to build from end to end and maximize profit. When you have commons or community areas, that's when you have these green spaces and blue spaces that are converted. So you must have nature and place making this kind of as a way for migrants to make the city their own, or for environmental action. That allows us to bridge this ecological wisdom of ancient cities to the future of cities. And I'll want to show you this one. Rohit Rao was an undergraduate intern who worked with us, and he developed this beautiful sketch of what an ecologically smart city would look like in India. And this is really what it would look like. So it's contemporary, but it also has women selling foraged fruits and seeds. It has someone taking a baby for a walk on the lake. It has artists. It has women foraging. It has, the pigs and the cows. And this is the real rich Indian city. And this is how we should imagine our ecologically smart cities. And finally, these are two of my books, which have more details of some of these. And I'd be happy to share more details if anyone wants. So I'll stop here because I hope we can keep some time for questions.
That's really wonderful talk, Madam Harini, and even the comment box have been uploaded with this appreciation. So I have few questions, Madam. Uh, is it possible to build a fully autonomous energetically and ecologically smart cities?
Um, See, it also depends. That's an interesting point. I think that depends on how you would frame a perfectly smart city. So, in my perspective is cities can never be completely sustainable. It's simply not possible. It has, given the density of people and the fact that you have such high consumption levels, can you make them more sustainable than they are? So energetically, maybe it will be never completely perfectly smart city. Ecologically, perfectly not smart city because you're already human and you're making that change. You're building, you have concrete, you have roads, you have electricity, you have all of this. You pump in water. But can you make it better than it is? I think you can definitely make them much better than they are, and there are many ways to do that. Of thinking outside the box. Again, let us say for instance, um, you want to plant, and there were all of these initiatives of smart walls or green walls that people were trying with creepers. But like I showed you that house with avocado, just a
Yeah.
chaja and then you grow avocado. Why can't you do something like that? These are very resilient plants and we know they grow very easily. Or rooftop gardens. Can we have, instead of painting these roofs white, and we can do that also, but instead of that, can we grow plants on the roof? Like the slum dwellers do. They have aluminum sheets, but they grow plants on the roof in paint buckets or whatever waste material they have, and it keeps them cool. And they'll not they will never go off market. So it's not like they can get all their food requirements. But can they reduce the food requirement by 20%? That's a 20% saving in terms of where the food comes from and the water and the electricity and everything. So I think that's the way I think of it. It's never that cities will be completely sustainable, but I think it's inevitable that we are going in the direction of more and more urbanization. So how much more sustainable, even at 5%, 10%, 20% saving is a lot of saving.
Okay. So, with your 25 years of experience in this sector, do you think that human beings have become more conscious and before with your experience
I think, in
about
fact, to
climate
me,
change?
yeah,
Or
to me, in fact, I would say that people are becoming more conscious. So if you look at the students, especially today, when I started teaching areas of development and sustainability, there was a lot of resistance often when students were looking at development, saying, why should we care about climate change or why do we care about biodiversity? Development is important first. But I think now the crises are so apparent to them that they realize that you need to look at all of these issues. And certainly, school students, I think, now at the forefront. Greta Thunberg and people like her leading the climate action around the world. It's because of people like them that we now know that climate change, something urgent needs to be done about it. Because without that, we would not have had this kind of change.
okay. So there is one more question from Ramamurthy. Is BBMP serious about ecology? Looks like all the initiatives coming from like you.
No, actually, the BBMP was a very close partner in lake rejuvenation. So there has been the BBMP Lakes Division has been extremely proactive in a lot of the lake rejuvenation around Bangalore. But there is a larger problem in terms of government. There are always very good officers in places, but the larger problem is there's no coordinated body. So BBMP does lakes, for instance. There is no BWS has to take care of the sewerage networks, and if there are no sewerage networks, then the sewage flows back into the lake. So there are all of these other challenges. Or survey department, if somebody is encroached on the place above the wetland that keeps the lake protected, then the survey department is a different wing. Forest department has its own jurisdiction. So that lack of coordination gives rise to a lot of problems.
Okay. So one question that is related to the last questions, like to whatever level at individual we try to we try to keep the environment at a particular temperature or to reduce the climate change or not to what effects we are seeing today due to the climate change at individual level, whatever we put our efforts, but is that equally going to balance whatever at the industrial level it is happening?
I think that's a very important issue. And to me, no. I mean, see, I think that so there is a plus yes and no answer. See, there is often a criticism. Many people, if you look at what we are told in the media or by people, is we need to reduce our footprint. We need to do composting. We should plant a tree. We should do individual actions, like you say. And in one sense, some many people pointed that that's a distraction, because we are saying we need to do. We are not going to hold corporates or other groups to action for their destruction of the environment. But to me, it's part of a journey. Often, what I find is looking at my own personal experience of many people involved with actually driving change in the city, whether they are activists or educators or people involved in, spreading the message about composting or things like that. They often start from personal change, then they move to doing something. So if you look at it, so I'll give you an example. There is a group in Sarjapur itself which was doing a lot of waste composting. So they started with protocols in their own house, then they moved it to the apartment, then they started working in the region around Sarjapur, and then they became so successful that there was a high court petition by some other group on waste management, and the high court said you should follow their protocol. It's called two bin one bag. And they said this protocol has been so excellently developed by this group of women that you should. It's the most practical way for the city. So that's the journey I'm talking about. Many people do that journey. So that journey starts with themselves and then it ends up by holding corporates accountable or holding government accountable or asking for larger scale change at the scale of the city.
Okay. So just give me some time, madam. I'm checking whether are there any questions. So one more question, like, uh, does this smart city bring equality? Like you have mentioned in your talk that equality is more important to bring the ecological balance. So do you think that smart city is going to bring that?
Unfortunately, not. I think so. If you take smart cities in the traditional idea, I mean, not the traditional, but the normal idea of the smart city, when you think of technology, of course, it's going to lead to greater inequality. Because, you have like I was saying, smart cities are for smart people. If it comes with that idea, then the smart people are those who have smartphones. And then, of course, that exacerbates inequality. And we had done an early study on smart city planning at Karnataka, for instance. And some of the plans that were there were to relocate slums outside the city and ban, these kinds of livelihood activities, but then bring more industries in, and that leads to pollution of a different kind. So it's not keeping into context the ecology of the city. So yeah, it's early days in India because smart cities have not yet taken off the way they were supposed to. But in many parts of the world, it's been shown to make inequality much worse.
Okay. So there is one question from Anil Kumar Jagyu, sir. Is there a message for the citizens what they can do within their gardens and areas around their places?
I think absolutely there is a very important message that if you can make your gardens organic as far as possible or wild spaces as far as possible. So you don't have manicured gardens. Nowadays many, and this is actually not for so much for citizens. Whether in Bangalore or Mysore, for instance, we found anybody with a home garden typically manages it in a way that is biodiversity friendly. But when you come to corporate campuses, public sector campuses across Bangalore, Mysore, for instance, if you see, they are much more biodiversity friendly. But if you look at a corporate campus, you will have palm trees which are foreign. You will have turf grass which is Mexican or Thai. All of this needs to be sprayed with fertilizers, pesticides, and manicured to kept clean. Apartment complexes similarly, and you need to keep things a little messy, a thing little wild, a little more organic, and plant fruiting trees. Which, even if you don't want to collect the produce, at least some birds or some other animals will eat it, right?
Yeah.
So that is something definitely we need to do, and that's one message. So one of the things we plan to do, for instance, is to release a guide which we are working on what you can plant in Bangalore if you want to plant for your, because we get a lot of requests from people, again, not for homes but for layouts or for apartments, or what should I plant and what can I plant in different places. So that kind of information I think is also important.
Okay. Thanks for that. There is one question from Amjad Sayed. Is Azim Premji University involved in such initiatives?
Involved in which, in these initiatives?
Yeah, initiatives what you have mentioned to protect
Yes, because
to keep the
I mean,
balance.
Yeah, all my this research that I'm presenting is done through Azim Premji University. So it's involved in the research, in the advocacy and writing, because we do a lot of writing, and in the publications. So I'll give you one example on Gundu Thopes, these thopes that we were talking about, these village forests in different areas. We had done a study in Bangalore based on which we wrote an illustrated book. Where have all the Gundu Thopes gone? My colleague Seema Mundoli and I and students from Azim Premji University had done the sketches and paintings. So it's a bilingual book, Kannada on one side, English on one side. And then we printed 6,500 copies, which have gone into Panchayat libraries all across Karnataka. So along with the teaching aid for the teachers so that they can take the children into the Gundatopes and do some basic activities with them on ecology.
So there is one comment from Vidya Shankar. The idea of smartness is different when it comes to politicians. A citizen group protested and stopped the government from building a road across Kukkaralli Lake. So how do
Exactly.
you
No.
view this?
I think that's a very important. I think that's a very inspiring story. I've also heard that story about Kukkaralli Lake and the road that was supposed to go across. And this is what we need. We need citizens to come together and put pressure, because government is always going to respond to its representatives. So if you have an elected representatives and the citizens are making that demand and they make it strongly enough, then the government will respond.
Continuing with our comment, don't you think the leaders have to be educated regarding this?
Of course they do, and they actually know. It's an interesting thing. So they are very well aware, because they are not where they are without being extremely smart. So of course we all know that, and they are dealing with imperatives that are very different, right? So to them, the roads and infrastructure are more important than ecology for certain reasons, because they're looking at elections, they're looking at what their people want, and often they're responding to the loudest voice of their constituents. So there are many other things, of course, involved with that, but if we make a loud enough noise, often we have a chance.
Uh, so this is a comment from Anuradha Jaglur. It's also a question. Uh, not generally a question on this topic itself, but thinking about the bamboo workers from KR Road, where did they have to relocate to?
No idea. Different parts of the city. So by the time, in fact, we had done our study, only three of the oldest families were there. There used to be 10 or 11 families, and several of them had left. And these three were thrown out in a few years. And they, like I said, that gentleman that I spoke to was in his 70s. He's been there all his life. So we don't know where they went to. Different parts of the city, maybe different cities. They themselves came in. So his parents came in as migrants to Bangalore about 70 plus years ago. But yeah, no idea. And very unfortunate.
Okay. Um, so yeah, there are a few more comments that are regarding to the talk. One is from Venkatramaya Jagannatha. He has asked us to visit www.iied.org for over 100 best practices on locally leading community-based adaptation case studies. So, do you also wish us to give such links or
Definitely, because I think these kinds of links would be very useful for people. There are a lot of people now I find who want to do things, but they want to know. I mean, they are struggling for information. So, how do you build a better house? How do you recycle water for in a house? How can you do all this in a relatively inexpensive way, but some way that is more sustainable? Because it's like that man that was saying, "Yav murkhanig mara ishtavilla." Who doesn't like trees? Who doesn't want to do sustainability? But they have other imperatives. So if they can, I think, put some alternate ideas in their mind which are easy to do, people can be nudged. And this, like I said, will not solve the corporate problem or the other 80% of the problem. But even if we can make a 20% change, we can make that 20%.
there is one more question from Anand Raj. With more people flooding cities like Bangalore from around India, given the economic situation, what do you think the future would look like? Any suggestions for this?
I don't know what the future would look like, and that is something I'm otherwise an optimist, and so I like to end the talk also with an optimist note. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, really looking at the situation of climate change, biodiversity crisis, people flooding into cities, what can we think of the future looking like? I think the one possibility is if we can strengthen rural livelihoods. Because NREGA, for instance, has really shown us during COVID times that if people can, nobody wants to leave their hometown. So if people can have good livelihoods in their villages, then hopefully we'll not have this flooding into cities. So at least Karnataka government, for instance, one of the things they have been doing in the last couple of years is focusing a lot of the NREGA work on strengthening water resources in these rural areas, rebuilding the tanks and the canals. And if this goes on, then hopefully 2, 3 years, 4 years from now, when all of them are done and interconnected, Karnataka will become more water resilient. Then maybe people will not have to, not have this level of desperate migration into Bangalore in cities like that. So that's the hope, I think, for the future.
So there is one more question from Manurada Jaglu. We know that feeder canals to lakes have been blocked because of development, even to Pukarahalli Lake. What can we do about them? That is almost reversible, isn't it?
It is, yes. Because one thing we've seen in Bangalore is the lakes die when the water inflow to them stops. So a very critical thing is to make the feeder canals to be opened. And often feeder canals are blocked. There are multiple ways. One is to remove encroachments. One is to divert the area. So that's also done sometimes. So sometimes when, let's say, there's something that has been built which cannot, I mean, assume it's a, let's say, 1,000 people apartment complex, and you can't, for whatever reason, demolish it, or you don't want to demolish it, then you can divert the canal around it. But in one way or the other, you can make sure that somehow it is possible. If the political will is there, these lakes can still be fed again. And if you do that, then you really save them a lot.
So there is one more question from Anil Kumar Jaglu. There is a lot of talk about mini forest in a very small plots. Um, Miyawaki forest, for example, does it make sense as far as you know?
Yeah, Miyawaki forests are actually we are right a lot in the in discussion these days. And Miyawaki forest is this idea which was developed by a Japanese person that you do a lot of very high density planting in an area, and over 4 5 years, it with a lot of different species, it develops into a mini forest area.
Okay.
It's very expensive. It is so it's very intense. It requires a lot of, so CSR largely is done with corporate funding and in small patches. So I'm ambivalent about it. I think we need small forests because if that's all the patch of land we have in the city, we should just do that because it's better than nothing. And if you link a lot of these small forest patches, then you will have a place for biodiversity. However, do you need the Miyawaki approach? Has it been sufficiently adapted to in the Indian context? Yes and no. I know of people who have it has worked in certain contexts, it has not worked. It's very dependent on the local soil, the mix of species, the people used, and the expense. So if there's a way to cut down the expense of this and do it more widely, that would be useful. But at the same time, I think we should think innovatively also. So, for instance, in Bombay, there's been a movement that for a very long time has been trying to do this thing plan that they call Mumbai on 2 feet. So Mumbai has no place for a garden like Lalbagh or Kabban Park. It's impossible to create something like that in the heart of the city. But they have a lot of canals for the small water bodies, canals that crisscross Mumbai. So the idea of Mumbai on 2 feet is you take that canal, you restore it. Instead of making it a Ganga Nala or a Nala which has sewage water, you make it a Nala full of good treated rainwater or pure water, along which you have a cycling path or a walking path. Then they say you don't even have to get stuck in traffic. You can just walk across different parts of Mumbai and instead of spending 4 hours in traffic, if you can spend 45 minutes walking along a nice lane or cycling across a airplanes, you get your exposure to nature. Mumbai gets clean water, groundwater recharge happens, the lakes are full, there's no flooding, so many benefits together. And people get exercise and people get off the roads. So those kinds of efforts, if government puts its mind behind. In Bangalore now, there is a plan to do similar kind of landscaping around canals along the Koramangala Canal. What will happen, we'll have to see. It's a long and expensive project, and in 2 years, we know how these projects sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. We have to see. But if these are the ways forward for us, they don't have to be expensive.
So there is one more thing I just want to ask. I guess you know about this Elon Musk ground routing. I'm not remembering that term. Where he is trying to connect the roads through ground. He is
What
making roads electric.
underground
He is trying to connect the routes through
roots?
ground.
Okay, okay. Huh.
Yeah, routes through while making channel through ground.
Uh-huh.
roads below another ground. I'm not remembering the whole technology name. I just read it some time ago. So, do you think this type of technology helps even in the Indian region, like
Yeah, I'm not.
Indian?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I think to me, any of these experimental technologies, it all depends on the cost and the kind of suitability to the condition. So we need to see.
Okay.
This particular one I'm not aware of. In general, technology can be a plus and technology can be a minus. It depends on, it has great potential for the plus, which is why we usually get attracted to it, but often it goes in the minus direction because of the making things
Yes.
more inequitable.
Okay.
So we have to see it really, but that doesn't mean one should be anti-technology. So it really depends.
Yeah. So I guess I have covered almost all the questions. Audience, if you have any more questions, you can just put in the comment box. Yes, madam. This is all. I guess there are no more questions left in the comment box too. So thanks for this wonderful talk, and it was really a good time spending with you. I think whatever you have told today, it will be used by all of us, and also spread this knowledge among our community. And hope so we reach this smart city as soon as possible, so there are no more imbalances in the nature.
Thank you so much, Rashmi. And thank you to everyone from Breakthrough Science Society and the
Yeah,
family
thanks.
members of the
Yeah,
Lakshman.
thanks from the thanks from the Breakthrough Science Society family, and hope so you come again, visit us, and give more talks on this.
Sure.
Thank you, madam.